Everyone who knew Robert Kennedy has a favorite remembrance of him. Here are those special ones of our guests.
There's a great story that John Siegenthaler tells. John was one of his top aides, about when they went to Peru, and they went into they were supposed to visit a university, and the university was filled with a number of communist students who were very angry with the Attorney General of the United States, and they started throwing eggs and tomatoes at him. And they sort of missed him and hit John Siegenthaler, who was standing behind him. And my father turned to John, and in a very uproarious kind of situation, said, well, if they're going to be any good revolutionaries, at least they got to get better aim.
After Robert Kennedy was slain, I was assigned to cover the campaign of Hubert Humphrey. Now, Hubert Humphrey had a reputation, deserved, of being a very decent person, very kind person, very thoughtful person. But when I went out on my first campaign trip with Humphrey, and by the way, I thought I had moved into an earlier century, simply because Robert Kennedy was speaking in blunt terms, insulting the groups in front of him, not pandering to them at all, and Humphrey was doing just the opposite, as were the other politicians of that day. But in any event, when we came back from the first trip with Humphrey, Humphrey got into his limousine, chauffeured limousine, and zoom, he was gone. Whenever we came back from a trip with Robert Kennedy, late at night at National Airport, when we returned to Washington, taxis were just about impossible to find, 2, 3 in the morning, whatever it was. Robert Kennedy never left the airport until everybody had a way home. Frequently, he'd have his cousin, Joe Gargan from Massachusetts down driving a great big limo. If you had family here and they met you, fine. But if you didn't have a way home and you couldn't get a taxi, Bobby never left until everybody was accounted for.
We had been arrested by the Kent County Sheriff because he had gotten word that the strike breakers were going to come to beat us up. So he arrested us. And Bobby couldn't understand it at all. He says, how can you arrest them when they're the victims? And the sheriff said, well, we arrested them to protect them. And then went on and really put his foot in his mouth. So at the end, this is close to noon, so at the lunch break, Bobby called the sheriff and the district attorney said, we're going to go to lunch for an hour. I'd like to suggest in the meantime, the sheriff read the Constitution of the United States, which is a great hit with us, you know, everybody else.
I remember a very powerful, I mean extremely powerful political person in Rochester, New York, who was kind of, you know, holding back his support of Robert Kennedy. You'll talk to me kind of attitude. The day that Robert Kennedy interviewed me on the airplane, the Caroline, which was the family plane. Just a personal note, that was about 11 months after the assassination of his brother Jack. There was a clothes tree in the plane that still had Jack's clothes on it and his boots. And it was like you walked into this plane and it was almost a presence. It was just absolutely wonderful. In this one meeting, there were 3 parts of Robert Kennedy that I saw. The warm, welcoming Robert Kennedy, who saw me as a totally intimidated young person that was asking to work on the campaign. And he put me at ease, and he said, I know you loved my brother Jack, because he saw me looking at the mementos, and he said, but I wondered, he said, if you could give me some of that love. And I said, yeah, I'd always had a special spot for Jack, but that there was a place that he could earn his own. And so he said, that's what I want to do. And I started working on the campaign. He said, I'm expecting someone in a few minutes. Why don't you stay, and then we'll talk about what it is I want you to do. So I waited, and on walks this powerful person. And he said, he looked at Bobby, and he said, if you want my support, you'd better know that I call the shots in Rochester. And Bobby looked up at him, and he said, gosh, he said, I really want Rochester, and I really would like to have it, he said, as part of my victory. He said, but I think I will, but without you. He said, I think maybe what you'd better do is find your way off this plane. And this man turned and he looked at him and he said, you'll never win this election. And Bobby looked at him and he moved forward and he put his finger out like this and he said, I'll never lose it.